Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of Lockheed Martin, Marilyn Houston. The Director of the Kennedy Space Center, Bob Cabana. The Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Jim Bridenstine. The Governor of Florida, the Honorable Ron DeSantis. Rick Armstrong, son of Apollo 11 Commander Neil Armstrong. The Apollo 11 lunar module pilot, Buzz Aldrin.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron DeSantis, Governor of Florida. It's an honor for me to be here to commemorate what was really one of the greatest achievements in the history of our country when we put these men on the moon. And Buzz, thank you for all you've done. You're a great hero. Thank you to the Thanks to all the members of the Armstrong family who have come. And you know, the saying of, it was taking one small step for one man being on the moon represented a giant leap for mankind. And I think that we have seen that over the years. One, just the fact that we did it after having set an audacious goal less than 10 years earlier that we would put somebody on the moon. A lot of people didn't think that could be done. And it's a testament to the hard work of people like Buzz and Neil Armstrong, but also the United States, being a free society and being committed to do great things, was able to achieve that. And I think that was very, very important. But also you look at what we now know since then about the moon, all the different scientific discoveries just in the last decade, so many really neat things. And so I think it's fitting that we're here at Kennedy Space Center not only to commemorate what happened 50 years ago, but also to recognize that that success has spawned really significant developments right now in private industry. We see it here with some of the great companies and great entrepreneurs in the world working hard to send more rockets into space. We see it through the support of the Trump-Pence administration, which we in this community very much appreciated. I want to also thank my friend Jim Bridenstine for really having a great vision as the director of NASA. So I'm excited to look back on that 50 years and what a great achievement it is. But I think the story of that is still being written, because I think the things that are going to happen in the hopefully relatively near future are going to be really ones for the record books. And if these guys had not succeeded, we may not be here being able to enjoy that today. And so it's my honor to introduce the director of the Kennedy Space Center here in NASA, which has just been such an iconic place for space, Robert Cabana.
Thank you, Governor DeSantis, and thank you for your support for us here at KSC and the Space Coast. It's a real pleasure for me to have all of you here at the Kennedy Space Center during this historic week as we celebrate man's first steps on the moon, and to continue the conversation of that next giant leap that's going to originate right here at KSC. It's been 45 years since we last set foot on the moon, and now our president has renewed the nation's focus on expanding humanity's presence beyond our home planet. Working with U.S. companies and international partners, NASA will push the boundaries of human exploration forward to the moon and on to Mars with the Artemis program. NASA is building the infrastructure for expanding human exploration into the solar system, and the Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft are the backbone of our exploration plans. Along with the modernized spaceport here at KSC, SLS and Orion represent the next era in space exploration with unmatched capabilities. The Orion spacecraft is built to take humans further into space than we've ever gone before. And with each milestone, we get that much closer to being flight ready. Orion is the safest, most advanced spacecraft ever built, and it will be flexible and capable enough to take us to a variety of destinations. Our partnership with Lockheed Martin is an integral part of America's Moon to Mars exploration approach laid out by President Trump. Today, Lockheed Martin is building and processing the Orion spacecraft right here at KSC for upcoming Artemis missions. It's my pleasure now to introduce and welcome Marilyn Hewson, Chairman, President, and CEO of the Lockheed Martin Corporation. Marilyn joined Lockheed Martin more than 35 years ago as an industrial engineer. Earlier this year, Time magazine identified her as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. She has served on several U.S. government advisory bodies, including a current appointment to the National Space Council Users Advisory Group. She's a fellow in the Royal Aeronautical Society and an associate fellow in the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Marilyn is a passionate leader with a fervent commitment to innovation and education. Please join me in welcoming Marilyn Hewson.
Mr. Vice President, Governor DeSantis, members of Congress, and other distinguished guests, it is absolutely my honor to represent Lockheed Martin today as we commemorate 50-year anniversary of Apollo 11. And I want to begin first by thanking the Vice President of the United States because he has worked tirelessly to help government and industry leaders to be empowered to really focus on how we can continue to lead in space as a nation and to continue the legacy of the Apollo program. You know, the Apollo 11 mission was a launching pad for decades of leadership by our nation in a range of opportunities that we brought in terms of allowing us to have scientific discovery, and through that, many scientific experiments and opportunities that improved our way of life. But beyond that, it has inspired so many and so many generations since that time that has allowed them to see what is possible in this final frontier. So we are very proud of the opportunity to be here today to commemorate that legacy that was left by those who participated in Apollo 11. But since that historic achievement, we are now, as Bob said, very honored to be working with NASA on many critical missions, but most importantly, the next giant leap that we're going to face, and that is taking humans again to the moon, and we are very proud to participate in that with the Orion spacecraft that you can see over here with us today, one of those spacecraft that'll be in the next uncrewed mission going forward, and then we'll produce those that are moving forward. Today I actually have the distinct privilege of introducing to you the individual who's going to be responsible for implementing the administration's vision for the future of America and our endeavors in space. He began his career in federal service with the U.S. Navy. He honorably served as a pilot on the USS Abraham Lincoln. And his experience in the military and in the civilian life as a leader have put him right up front and center to understand what we face in terms of the new space race. A race that is very important to our national security, a race that is very important to continue to advance scientific discovery. So with that, as I look at him and the leadership and the farsightedness that he has that are so critical to our American programs, I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Jim Bridenstine, the administrator for NASA.
Well, as you know, this is a wonderful day. It's a day of celebration not just for NASA and the United States of America, but in fact for all of the world. I want to thank Marilyn for that great introduction and for your leadership. I know this is as big a day for Lockheed Martin as it is for all of us. I also want to thank my good friend, Governor Ron DeSantis. We were freshmen together in the House of Representatives. Now you're leading this great state. And I will tell you, Ron DeSantis is a governor who cares deeply about the Kennedy Space Center. he calls me from time to time to make sure I know how deeply he cares about this Space Center. And just know that your governor is doing great work on behalf of the Kennedy Space Center. I also want to thank Representative Scalise, who is the minority whip, and Representative Adderholt. And I can see we have some NASA folks sitting over here by Representative Adderholt. Know this. This is the gentleman who is the ranking member on the committee that funds NASA. So make sure you're being really nice to that gentleman over there. I also want to thank Representative Posey, who has spent a great deal of time with me in the House, helping me understand the value of this center. And of course, he calls me from time to time to let me know what I should be doing down here. So it's great to have Representative Posey. Representative Babbitt is the ranking member on the science, or the space subcommittee of the Science Committee. He's a Texan, and I will tell you, he looks at space from an all-of-America approach, and we're grateful for his service in that realm. And of course, Congressman Mast and Congressman Waltz. These are two individuals who are keen on the national security aspect of space and who have been very helpful to us as an agency as we think about the future and the strategic presence of the United States in space. And of course, the most important person in the room, Mrs. Karen Pence. Thank you for celebrating with us today. And of course, there's somebody else that I will be introducing later. I also want to thank Bob Cabana for helping transform this facility into a multi-user spaceport. There was a day in the United States of America when the space shuttles were retiring, the Constellation program was being canceled. Bob Cabana had a tough job to do here at the Kennedy Space Center, and he has transformed it in a way that has maintained the presence. And now we have great news that in fact, the American space program is coming back. It's coming back with a vengeance, and I'll be talking about that more in a minute. But Bob Cabana, you've done a great job here, and we are so grateful for your service. Most importantly, it is an honor to have with us here one of the men who first walked on the moon a half-century ago, the legendary, the one and only Buzz Aldrin. It is also a pleasure to have Neil Armstrong's son Rick and grandson Bryce with us here today. Rick and Bryce, thank you for helping us share Neil's legacy with the next generation of moonwalkers. And most importantly, thank you so much for sharing your dad and your granddad, not just with the United States of America, but the entire world. We are grateful for your service as well. Landing men on the moon was by far the hardest thing ever accomplished in human history. It's been calculated that for every hour Apollo astronauts either flew through space or walked on the surface of the moon, approximately 1 million work hours on Earth were needed. No other collective project, not the pyramids, nor the Panama Canal, even came close. Although, when I first started reading this, I was wondering how they knew about the pyramids, because that was 10,000 years ago. But that's what people say. In all, over 400,000 NASA employees and contractors from over 20,000 businesses worked night and day to fulfill President John F. Kennedy's vision, not just once, but 6 times. And lest we forget, what were we trying to do in the 1960s? This was a contest of great powers, the United States of America against the Soviet Union. And it was about technological prowess, for sure. But more importantly, it was about demonstrating that our political and economic system was superior to that of the Soviet Union at the time. And when Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, we were able to demonstrate American greatness. Despite the intensity of the space race, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins designed the Apollo 11 patch to represent the intentions of America and the hopes of NASA. The patch depicts an eagle landing on the moon with an olive branch in its talons, conveying a mission of peace rather than a mission of conquest. The Bible says that one day the nations of the world will learn war no more and, quote, beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, unquote. In fact, soon after Apollo 11, the United States partnered with the Soviet Union on what became the Apollo-Soyuz program. Decades later, the diplomatic capabilities of space continue to improve the world as American astronauts and Russian cosmonauts have been living and working together aboard the International Space Station for almost 20 years. Furthermore, American astronaut Andrew Morgan, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano, and Russian cosmonaut Alexander Svortskov launched just moments ago in Kazakhstan to join their fellow Expedition 60 crew members aboard the International Space Station, another monumental day for NASA. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the moon landings were the countless young Americans they inspired to join science, technology, engineering, and math fields of study. The Apollo program hastened groundbreaking technological advancements that continue to bestow benefits on modern society even today. However, not all administrations in the past had the vision necessary to advance humanity further into the solar system. And I know this region of the United States, the Space Coast in particular, felt it very hard when the space shuttles were retired and the Constellation program was canceled. However, today, similar to the 1960s, we too have an opportunity to take a giant leap forward for all of humanity. President Trump and Vice President Pence have given us a bold direction as an agency to return to the moon within 5 years and go forward to Mars. Their direction is not simply empty rhetoric. They have backed up their vision with budget requests needed to accomplish this objective. NASA is calling this program the Artemis program. We all love Apollo, but in the Artemis program we go to the moon sustainably. And this time, we have a very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women. And in Greek mythology, Artemis happens to be the twin sister of Apollo, and she's the goddess of the moon. So this time when we go to the moon, we in fact go with all of America. After the 1969 moon landing, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins signed a silk screen patch flown aboard Apollo 11. This is an interesting story, and I don't think it's told enough. It's an interesting story. They flew on Apollo 11 a silk screen patch and presented it to NASA for safekeeping for the future. The inscription on the patch reads, quote, "Carried to the moon aboard Apollo 11, presented to the Mars One crew," unquote. Looking forward into the future, it is only appropriate that a patch which witnessed humanity's first giant leap should be there for its second giant leap. And with the legacy of Apollo and the leadership of President Trump and Vice President Pence, NASA's future mission to Mars is fast approaching. It is now my honor to introduce to you the Chairman of the National Space Council and the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
Administrator Bridenstine, Director Cabana, General Selva, distinguished members of Congress, Marilyn Houston, the dedicated men and women of NASA, and especially Rick Armstrong and the members of the Neil Armstrong family and Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin. It is my great honor to be here with all of you today. It's great to be back here at the John F. Kennedy Space Center as Vice President and as Chairman of the National Space Council with my wonderful wife, Karen, to celebrate with all of you the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, a half a century ago that will be remembered forever. And I've been looking forward to this day, but allow me to bring greetings from another great space enthusiast, a great champion of American leadership in space. I begin today by bringing greetings from the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. Today, our nation pays tribute to three brave astronauts who sat atop a 360-foot rocket that lifted off from Pad 39A 50 years ago this week. Two of whom walked on the moon 50 years ago today. We also gather to pay tribute to the nearly 400,000 Americans, engineers, technicians, designers, whose sacrifices and dedication made it possible for Apollo 11 to complete what another president called the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure upon which mankind has ever embarked. Let's hear it for all those who supported these three brave astronauts 50 years ago. When President Kennedy challenged the nation in 1961 to put a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth before the decade was out, it's important to remember that our country was not yet ready to meet that challenge. We didn't have the rockets, or the launch pads, or the spacesuits, or the lander. We hadn't even invented many of the materials or tools that we would need. Not only did we not have what we needed, we didn't even know what we needed. President Kennedy summarized that epic endeavor in one simple sentence: we choose to go to the moon. And make no mistake about it, the moon was a choice, an American choice. And like every time the American people make up their mind, once that decision was made, American ingenuity, grit, and determination, the achievement was inevitable. The only challenges that remain were challenges of engineering and science. The moon didn't come easily, and it didn't come without cost, and it did not come without grave danger or without sacrifice. To this day, Americans grieve the loss of three brave astronauts of Apollo 1 who were lost in a fire on the launch pad in January of 1967. And we think of them and their families even today. The risks for Apollo 11 were so great, the odds were so long, that many fear that even if our astronauts made it to the moon, they might not make it back. In fact, history records that President Nixon prepared a speech in the event of tragedy, where he would explain to the nation that the mission had failed. But of course, the mission didn't fail. After all, with 400,000 men and women behind the mission at NASA, and with the hearts and prayers of the American people, How could it fail? And at the controls of the Apollo 11 lunar module, known as Eagle, stood two great Americans. Mission Commander Neil Armstrong, and a man who is with us today, Lunar Module Pilot Buzz Aldrin. And circling overhead in lunar orbit was Command Module Pilot Michael Collins. Just picture it. 50 years ago today, at almost exactly this hour, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were about halfway into their powered descent on the final leg of their landing on the moon. There they were, standing beside one another in a capsule not much bigger than a couple of telephone booths, just minutes from touchdown. They thought they were ready for every contingency. After all, as Buzz told me just a few days ago, they had spent 2 years intensively training for this moment, and they'd run almost 600 simulated landings, all designed to be more difficult than the real thing. Eagle had just finished its rollover to position itself for final approach when all of a sudden Neil Armstrong called out to Houston that Eagle had a 12:02 alarm. The problem was nobody on board or in Houston had any idea what a 12:02 alarm was. Eagle's flight computer was overloading. Not only could they not see the moon out their windows, they couldn't know for certain how far they were from the surface. Not a good way to fly. And yet, how calm they were. Working with the team back here on Earth, they quickly resolved the problem without betraying the slightest anxiety. People all over the world were watching with no idea that anything had gone wrong. That, my friends, is what they used to call the right stuff. You know, there's a reason Neil Armstrong as well was called the Ice Commander in his day. When the original landing area turned out to be so full of large boulders that landing there would have doomed the mission and the crew, history records that Neil Armstrong calmly took control of the lunar module, skimmed along the top of the surface of the moon in search for a safe place to touch down. And by the time he found a safe spot, known to all of us as Tranquility Base, Armstrong and Aldrin had only 17 seconds of fuel remaining. Like everyone of my generation, I remember that day. 600 million people around the world were watching their TVs and listening to their radios, waiting with admiration, anxiety, and wonder. And I was one of them. A little boy sitting in front of our black and white television in the basement of our home in Indiana. When those first snowy images of Neil Armstrong stepping off the bottom rung of the ladder beamed down to Earth at 10:56 p.m. on Sunday, July 20th, 1969, they made an indelible mark, not just on my imagination, but on the imagination of my generation and every generation to come. It was a moment so rich in meaning that upon hearing Neil Armstrong's first call from Tranquility Base, even the era's greatest newsman, Walter Cronkite, could only shake his head and utter two words: "Oh boy." All at once the nation held its breath. As through the crackling broadcast we listened to, we heard Neil Armstrong use those immortal words. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. In that moment, the men of Apollo 11 did more than help expand our understanding of creation, and they did more than win the space race. They brought together our nation, and for one brief moment, all the people of the world were truly one. Now, true to their creed, astronauts have never liked the idea of being called heroes. Yet for all they did, for all the risks they took, if Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins are not heroes, then there are no heroes. We honor these men today, and America will always honor our Apollo astronauts. They were heroes all. We honor the men of Apollo 11 by remembering their epic voyage and telling their story. But we also honor them by continuing the work they so nobly and courageously advanced in American space exploration. Apollo 11 was followed by 5 more successful moon missions, culminating in the final historic journey of Apollo 17. America's last trip to the moon. As we honor our Apollo 11 astronauts, we are also honored today to be joined by Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Schmitt. Thank you for your courageous service. As Harrison and I have discussed about his mission, while the last words spoken on the moon might not be as well known as the first words, his fellow astronaut, Gene Cernan, said more perhaps than anyone could have known at the time. It was a challenge to our time. As he stepped off the moon on December 17, 1972, he said these words, and I quote, "As I take man's last steps on the moon for some time to come, history will record that America's challenge of today has forged man's destiny of tomorrow." And then he ended by saying, "We leave the moon as we came, and God willing, we shall soon return with peace and hope for all mankind." Those were words of challenge in 1972. And in our time, as President Trump said, this generation of Americans knows that it is America's destiny to be the leader amongst nations on our adventure into the great unknown. And standing before you today, I am proud to report, at the direction of the President of the United States of America, America will return to the moon within the next 5 years, and the next man and the first woman on the moon will be American astronauts. We're going back. After more than 45 years, where one administration after another chose to limit America's space program to low Earth orbit, President Donald Trump has changed all that. Early in this administration, the President revived the National Space Council within the White House to coordinate all space-related activities across the government, including matters related to national security. And we've been hard at work. The Space Council has helped bring together skilled leaders in business and industry to revive and renew America's commitment to human space exploration. And I'm pleased that many members of our user advisory group for the Space Council are with us today for this historic occasion. Join me in welcoming these dedicated and distinguished Americans. President Trump also signed Space Policy Directive 1, challenging NASA to lead the return of Americans to the moon, send the first Americans to Mars, and enable humans to expand and deepen our reach across the solar system. It is our mission. And as I speak to you today, I'm proud to report we're investing in new rockets, new spaceships. We're working with private companies around this country to develop the new technologies of the future by unleashing the burgeoning private space industry that dots the landscape of this historic center in this nation. And within the next year, we will once again send American astronauts into space on American rockets from American soil. Already we've given our human exploration missions a newfound sense of urgency, not seen in more than a generation. Last year, NASA and American innovators began an accelerated design process for both the Lunar Orbital Gateway and the Lunar Surface Base, all of which we will need to support Americans on the moon and to train and prepare to send Americans to Mars. And while we've made great strides in advancing the President's bold vision for space, unlike in years past, we will have the budgets to match it. That's why I'm especially grateful today to be joined by some of the greatest champions of American leadership in space in the Congress of the United States. House Minority Whip Steve Scalise, Congressman Robert Aderholt, Congressman Brian Babin, Congressman Bill Posey, and other distinguished members of Congress. Would you please rise and allow us to express our appreciation for your strong support of the new American leadership. With strong bipartisan support, this President's already signed into law the largest NASA budget ever. And on this historic occasion, I'm told that we've also achieved a critical milestone in our effort to go to the moon and beyond. Today, thanks to the hard work of the men of NASA, men and women of NASA, and of American industry, the Orion crew vehicle for the Artemis I mission is complete and ready to begin preparations for its historic first flight. In the coming years, American astronauts will return to the moon aboard the Orion. Then they'll return with new ambitions. We will spend weeks and months, not days and hours, on the lunar surface. This time we're going to the moon to stay and to explore and develop new technologies. We will extract water from ice in the permanently shadowed craters of the South Pole. We will fly on a new generation of spacecraft that will enable us to reach Mars, not in years, but in months. Americans are leading in space once again. And today we're reminded how American leadership 50 years ago, the accomplishment of Apollo 11, inspired our nation. As the President said, it ignited our sense of adventure and steeled our belief that no dream is impossible, no matter how lofty or challenging. And as Buzz Aldrin said today, in his words, looking back on landing on the moon wasn't just our job, it was a historic opportunity to prove to the world America's can-do spirit. As we lead in human space exploration again, we'll carry not only American ingenuity and pride, but most importantly, we'll carry America's ideals into the vast expanse of space. Ideals of freedom and liberty. Apollo 11 is the only event in the 20th century that stands a chance of being widely remembered in the 30th century. 1,000 years from now, July 20th, 1969, will likely be a date that will live in the minds and imaginations of men and women, as long as there are men and women to remember. Across this world, across this solar system, and beyond. So today, we remember the heroes of Apollo 11 and all the heroes that supported them in their mission, some 400,000 Americans. But today we also reaffirm our commitment to unlock the mysteries of space and to lead. And as we continue on this American journey, we go with the same resolve and determination of those who have gone before. And we go with faith. Faith in the courage of this new generation of astronauts. Men and women of the character and caliber of those who have gone before. They are remarkable pioneers who will carry American leadership into space. Faith in the ingenuity of the men and women of NASA and all of those across the American space enterprise, whose creativity and tireless efforts in the days ahead will match that of their forebears, who created and invented new ways to explore and expand human understanding with American leadership. And finally, I believe as we go forward, as millions of Americans believe in their hearts and have throughout the generations, that we'll go forward with faith that as those pioneers put on the spacesuits, climb aboard the rockets, that we'll believe that even if they rise on the wings of the dawn, even if they go up to the heavens, that even there his hand will guide them. His right hand will hold them fast. And that'll be our prayer. Today we mark the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. We celebrate the heroic astronauts who accomplished that extraordinary feat in human history, and all those who supported them. And today we resolve, for the sake of all they accomplished, that America will lead in space once again. And this nation will once again astonish the world with the heights we reach and the wonders we achieve. So may God bless the crew of Apollo 11 and all who supported them on their historic journey. May God bless this new generation of pioneers and all who will support them. May God continue to bless the United States of America.